Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to discuss about JavaScript and how it works behind the scene. This could be a direct question in your interviews, so do make sure that you watch the video fully and understand all about how JavaScript works behind the scene. So without further ado, let's get started. But before that, if you haven't subscribed the channel, just go ahead and do that because we are gonna cover a lot about front-end interviews and other tech related videos in this channel. And please do share this video with your friends if you feel that this could benefit them. So let's get started. Hey everyone, thanks for joining in, and with this series we are starting with the first video of this JavaScript session parts in the front-end series. So we've already covered what rounds are there in front-end. Excluding the system design round, we'll cover that as well. We have some guests coming in where we'll be discussing what exactly system design round in front end goes in. But with that, let's first start with the JavaScript series. So there will be no blockage in preparation and you can continue with that. And we'll be starting with what and why JavaScript. This could be the direct questions as well sometime in the interview, because if you are using the language, knowing the history, knowing like what and when it came becomes important sometimes, right? So let's get started and understand like what and why JavaScript. First question is like we'll be covering like the what part. So what JavaScript basically, if anybody asks you like what will be your answer, like mostly in browser, if you see the interactivity, if you see the action happening, if you see the animation happening, that is possible using CSS as well, but there is a lot of animation that happens with JavaScript as well, right? So if you see these things, generally JavaScript is present in that website. Just imagine the days like 1995 before, like generally all the websites were used to be like static website. They were not like interactivity, just it was dump like static website with HTML and ugly looking like HTML websites, right? Not even CSS at that time. We have really come a long way, and we are seeing like JavaScript frameworks day by day, and it's improving a lot. So let's get started. So if anybody asks like what's JavaScript, the simple answer should be JavaScript is a dynamic type single-threaded scripting language which is used for web development and many other development such as game development as well. In 1995, Brandon H came with certain language which is now named as JavaScript, is mostly now used as for web development, and mostly all the websites which have interactivity use JavaScript in some form, be it using other frameworks which ultimately compile to JavaScript, because the browser only understands JavaScript. So this is how JavaScript should be defined. Now let's understand, like if you have a JavaScript code, you need an environment to execute it, right? So you just write JavaScript code, there should be some place that needs to be executed, just like other language, be it like C++, be it C, be it Java, be it anything that needs to be run in some kind of environment. So JavaScript also runs in many environment. Now we have Node.js as well. Before we didn't had it, but the main environment that JavaScript runs in is browser. It's some kind of browser, right? So let's understand. So you have a piece of JavaScript code that needs to be executed in a web browser. So there are a lot of things that goes in behind. It's not that simple like as you like you're executing JavaScript in a browser. There is a lot of things that happening in the backend that runs JavaScript in a browser, and we are going to discuss that in this video itself. It's going to be a long video, so stay like hooked and understand everything behind how JavaScript is run in a browser, right? So let's get started first. Before moving forward, like make sure that hit that subscribe button and stay tuned with these videos coming in. So before moving forward, let me create a separate notebook and come back. Yep, so we have our notebook here. The first question comes in like, is JavaScript run in the web browser? It should be some kind of UI that you have to see where JavaScript is performing some action, or if something is happening like from that UI that makes the JavaScript run. Yes, you are correct. HTML, CSS mostly used to create the UI and link it to the JavaScript so that we can execute JavaScript from HTML or CSS. But there is also a way to directly execute JavaScript in the browser using console and other things. But mostly it is used by HTML to execute the JavaScript. So let's understand like how it is linked and how it is done. So before moving forward, I would like to understand two words, like one is parser, right, and one is JavaScript engine, JS engine. So these two words I would like you to understand first before moving forward. One is parser, one is JavaScript engine. Parser, as the name suggests, if you're coming from other language, you might already know this, but I will tell you, parser is a program that runs line by line, and it checks like if your code fits the structure that is defined by the language. For example, JavaScript has certain set of rules that need to be followed. So if you're writing a JavaScript code, the parser go line by line to your JavaScript code and just checks that if there is an error or not. If there is an error, it will generally throw an error. If not, it will pass it through, right? So now we understand like what parser is. It goes to line by line and check like if there are any syntax error or not, right? Now understand like your JavaScript code is there, that needs to be go into somewhere, right? Parser checks it, it's correct, but it need to go somewhere to run, right? So where should it go? It usually goes into a JS engine, right? JS engine is simply a computer program, like written by someone, where JavaScript can be executed, right? Compiled to binary instruction. So you have to understand now, browser does not understand JS code, right? It's a high level language. The computer needs to given a simple computer machine readable language that is usually known as machine code. We usually call as it as machine code, right? That needs to be given to a machine to read that. So what JavaScript engine does is it receives the JavaScript source code and compiles it to a binary instruction that CPU can understand, or the computer can understand. So these JavaScript engine are very, very specific to browsers as well, because the vendor that develop the browser usually take some JavaScript engine to run inside it. For example, Google Chrome that we use currently have V8 engine. So V8 is a JavaScript engine. If you see Safari browser that use in iOS generally have JavaScript core as a JavaScript engine. Then there is Internet Explorer that used to have Chakra inside that. Then is Chromium. There is a lot of things that came in. So just understand, browser and a high level language is need to be transferred into a machine code that machine can understand. And how it is done, parser checks like if there is an error. If there is no error, it passes to JS engine, and JS engine compiles it to a binary code that a computer can understand. So this is the overall thing that happens behind the scene whenever you are given a JavaScript code to a browser, right? So we'll move forward and understand like how it happens. So I said like there is a HTML file and there is a JavaScript file where JavaScript code executes, right? So just understand and see like how it is done. So we'll directly dive into a code editor and we'll see how it is linked and it is done, right? Yep. So as you can see, we have an environment where we are running our simple web app. HTML, there is a HTML file, there is an index file that will contain JavaScript, there is a CSS file with styles. But for now, just understand this is a HTML file. You're seeing hey, hello, what's up, that is coming from this particular this particular HTML file, right? So if I go ahead and write JavaScript, suppose I write, hey, welcome to this series, right? So now if I hit save and again run it, this particular HTML file, you can't see anything in console. Generally console is the place where you see the JavaScript output, but you can't see the console's output here, because the HTML is running. You can see this thing. If I modify some things here, it will eventually come here as well. It eventually comes there as well, right? We can see now 3 of the question marks, right? So it usually comes here, but you can't see the console even if you wrote it here, right? In this particular JS file. Now the thing is, you have to link this JS file to HTML to understand HTML. Okay, there is a JavaScript file where I need to look for, right? So you go ahead, and how you do it is you add a script tag. You say this HTML file that I have a script that is coming from src, which is present in my src folder, which is this one, and inside it I have an index.js file. Just see, once I do this, I just see that is coming from, like, hey, welcome to series, that is coming from our index.js file. Now understand, like, this is JavaScript loaded now in our HTML file, and that is executed by the browser using some JavaScript engine, and we can see that literally here. So this is how JavaScript link happens in the HTML file, but there are a lot of other ways to do that as well. You can directly write code inside script tag. There are module system that can be created. There is a lot happening, but basic thing is you can link your JavaScript to your HTML, right? There are a lot of technology that came in, like Node.js, which allow you to run JavaScript directly, and that had enabled us to bring, like, backend framework like Express.js, and now you can not only write front-end application, but you can also write backend application with that, right? So now let's understand, like, you have a script tag, you have linked your JavaScript code, but the thing is, whenever a JavaScript code runs, right, the work of a compiler, so work of the JavaScript engine to compile the code to the machine code, right? So whenever this compiles happen, right, the JavaScript engine creates a special environment which is known as execution context, So JavaScript engine creates a special environment. This is known as execution context. For example, this is your execution context. So this is created by JavaScript engine. Now this JavaScript this execution context handle your transformation and execution of the code, right? So this entire environment is known as execution context, and it executes your JavaScript code simply. Like, just understand this, right? So execution context contains the code that is exactly running at this point of time, as well as some code is pointing to some other code as well that is also brought inside the execution context while running. So you have to understand that, right? So now if you talk about execution context as well, this is a very, very deep topic. It could be long, so we'll just go in this video itself. So execution context is also two types. One is global execution context, one is function execution context. So whenever you have a JavaScript file, for example .js file, right, you link it to HTML, one execution context will be created, one global execution context will be created, one global, note that point, one global execution context will be created. But JavaScript, for each file, it create only one global execution context, but there could be as many as function execution context, that is known as FEC, function execution context. So let's have a JavaScript file where my execution context is created. Now what happens if anything inside a file that is not inside a function comes around this particular global execution context? Everything that is not in a function which will be coming inside this particular execution context, and that hosts bring up the whole idea of scoping, hoisting, and other things. We'll talk about that in this series, so make sure that you hit that subscribe button. So now we have this execution context. Once we have this execution context, suppose we are executing our JavaScript code line by line, once and only once it encounters a function that could be executed by the JavaScript engine, execution context line by line, it creates a new environment, new execution context, that is known as functional execution context. So imagine like having one execution context, and inside it you can have many function. This particular are functional execution context, right? So this is how these two different execution contexts work. I hope it was clear, right? And just remember the fact there will be only one global execution context per file, and there could be like many function execution context, right? So let's understand now how these execution contexts are created, right? What happens when the code runs and when the entire program finishes, right? And what is known as execution stack as well, we understand. Let's understand how, a execution context is created when a JavaScript code is ran. So first one is like, let's understand like the phases. So there are two phases in which the execution context is created. First one is your creation phase, where the actual execution context is created and the values of the program are created. For example, we'll see how. Next one is execution context. So there are two phases that happens in an execution context. One is creation phase, second one is execution phase. So let's create an execution context. So we divide the execution context into two parts. One is memory part, one is code part. So what memory part does it hold all the memories, whatever happens in a scope. So it can hold like memories in scope. So we'll see like in scoping video like how this happens, but for now just understand like it holds like all the variables, right? And memory to them. That's it. And code is also known as like execution thread, where actual execution happens. Okay, and this is how they are actually named, right? So okay, and it's also called as like variable environment, because it also holds the variables, as I talked, like memory actually. So it is also called a variable environment. You can just say that environment of many variables, right? So let's understand going by this particular code and how it is mapped to execution context. So first it will come here, the JavaScript counter will come here and execute. See that okay, there is a var which have a value x5. So in creation phase, the initialization of value doesn't happen. It just creates and declare like okay, this is the variable that is happening. So how it will do is it maps a key value pair, each of them like this. So what it will do, it will do x, and it will put an undefined value to it, because the initialization doesn't happen, like the putting the value to the variables doesn't happen in the creation phase. In the creation phase, it will just bring the variables and assign it undefined, right? Let's move on to the line number 3. Once it comes to line number 3, it encounter it is a function. So this is very important. Function differs from the variable in bit a different way. So what we'll do is it will create this particular function. The function name is odd, right? So what it will do, it will create the entire this particular thing. It will just bring it here and assign it to is odd. Similarly for is odd 2 as well, it will do the same thing, right? So it will bring the entire function out here, right? Now what happens, it goes to like this particular line, and again same thing, you might already have guessed, it will do the result and it will put undefined to this, right? Now the creation phase is already completed. The creation phase is already completed. Now comes the execution phase, and this one is very interesting one. Now again the code, like it happens 2 times. One is creation, one is execution. Creation already completed. Now again the counter starts and it goes to the first line, and you see that x is initialized with 5. So what we'll do is it will remove this undefined and put the value 5 here and put the value 5 here. This is how it happens. Again it goes to the next line, that is odd, and see that there is a function. So it doesn't do anything because the function is declared here but haven't called. Again goes to the next one, the function is declared here but haven't called. Again goes to the next one. Once it goes to the next one, you'll find that this is odd is called. Now to assign this value to result, what it will call is it will call is odd. So it will go to is odd, this particular function, And as you said, like this is a global execution context before we have already discussed. Now it's time to creation of function execution context because a function is executed. So what will happen is it will create a new execution context that will be a function execution context. It will not be global execution context. And what it will do is it will bring this particular code and execute in this. So it is also divided into two parts. One is memory section, one is code section. So what it will do is it will create a variable that is a here, that will be undefined before. Once the value is passed, like as a 3, it will assign 3, right? A is 3. Now it will again see that, okay, is or 2 is called. So it becomes more complex. Now what happens is this particular function is called and it have some values, right? So again, this will create another execution context inside that function execution context, another function execute. This is also a function execution context. It is getting a bit dirty, but just trying to understand, like this is also function execution context. And now see, a function executing context is created in another function execution context. So that creates the whole new concept, right? So again, here it also be divided into memory and code, just like this one. And you will see that execution of this part out here. So once this is complete, this will return the value to this. So this will return the value to this, right? So this will see like 3, it was passed and nothing happened. It returned the control to here. It will come again here, this particular line, and it will see 3 modulo 2. That will happen in the code section actually, equal to 2. That is not equal to 2. So it will return a false to this particular value. So this will be assigned false. So this is how it happens, like inside really this happens. Now the question is, there is one global execution context. It creates a new function execution context, which in turn creates a new function execution context. Now the thing is how this function executor content is managed. The simple answer should be it is managed by execution stack. It is managed by execution stack. So what happens, I'll just show you out here. Let me make a stack. So this is a stack. What happens is whenever global execution context is created, this stack is created. Whenever function call happens, this is odd function call happen at first, right? So it will create an item inside it. Now again, this is odd calls is odd 2. So this will also create an item inside a stack. So this is a basically stack, execution stack. So once this is completed, it passes the counter to this. As we saw, this particular thing passes the counter to this. So this is also executed. This particular passes the counter to execution context. So once this is done, this passes counter to execution context, global execution context. So this is how the stack is created. Let me show you in a visualizer how it actually look like basically. So we have this awesome website where we can visualize our concept, right? So if I go here and choose this, if I choose call stack, so we want to demonstrate the call stack thing, right? So let me bring my code. Okay, it went. Okay, this is the code that we were seeing. I'll cut this and bring to the call stack, and we execute this. So what I will do is I will run it, right? So once it runs, it create the entire environment to demonstration, then we'll start again, right? Let it create first, and huge shout out to this particular website because of this we are getting to understand this. So it is ready now. So there is something known as step out here, which is like giving us to step it. For example, you can't see, let me move it up. Yep. So if you do step, it will run one step at a time. The JavaScript run one step at a time. So if I do a step, so you'll see that this particular function that was odd, right, came here. So if you see, this came here, this is the function came here. So this function came here because it was called from this particular place. So I'll step again. Now what happens, this particular function called this particular odd2 function, so it again comes here. So it will return something, right? And if it returns, it goes to this particular line itself, the next line itself. So you'll see that is or will be destroyed now if I do a step. So you see this is already destroyed because it's already returned from this particular to this function, right? Now it will execute this return, and this is also returned to execution context. So this function is or will be also destroyed. So do this, see this is also destroyed. Now it comes here and assign the value, this particular return value to res, that will be false, right? So this was exact concept I just showed you in a visualizer. And now the question comes, how JavaScript is like, synchronous single threaded language, and we'll talk about that very in detail in our event loop and synchronous JavaScript video. But for this video, just the key takeaway is what is execution context, what are the type of execution context, how execution context created, and how execution stack works. So that is for this video. I know this was long, but this was very, very in-depth. So just stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, and I'll surely catch you up in the next one. And please share this video if you're liking this series, and I'll see you next time. Till then, take care. Bye bye.